Innovation hubs are about people and connections. It's about getting R&D institutions, venture capital, startups all under one roof. Sounds easy enough. The question is, how do you do it? Fred, let's get you started. What does it take?
What does it take? So in my experience, I think there's three things that need to come together for an innovation hub to take place. The first and most important is the culture. A culture that allows people to dream, to imagine, and one that allows people to recover from failure, right? And where there's continuous learning, and everything. Because without that, you cannot expand into new frontiers and innovate, right? So the most important thing to get right, and I think this is something that it's hard to measure, it's intangible, but it's the culture. That's where I think it really starts from. The second thing that I believe needs to come together is an ecosystem approach. Because innovation hubs ultimately need to bring several things together, and just one or two of them alone will not work. So you have to bring in the right regulations, the government support, the funding, the technology, the infrastructure, and of course, most importantly, the talent. Talent, in my experience, is the most critical part of that ecosystem, but it needs to be part of an overall thing. And there needs to be a concentration of all of those things in a certain area for them to feed off each other and for the innovation to take place. And so for example, that's why we have invested a lot in the African Leadership Group in building talent. Today we're training about 250,000 software engineers and data scientists across Africa. But we are focusing it in 8 hubs where we're trying to build up a lot of these, the other aspects of the ecosystem. And the third thing is relevance. It has to be relevant to the context of that region, right? You can't just copy and paste from Silicon Valley and bring it to Qatar or to Africa or Southeast Asia. It needs to be relevant to that unique, comparative advantages of that, of where you are, and the features of your talent pool and the other assets that you have, right? So looking inward and understanding what makes you special and using that as the basis for your own innovation ecosystem.
Alina, you work with startups in Africa as well as Southeast Asia. We talk about the ecosystems, well and good, but we also want it to be more equitable. So how are you looking at it?
I very much agree with Fred. I think it does start with culture change and leadership and delivering different types of capital. I mean, we talk about capital as if it's just financial capital, but it's also human capital. It's also getting to understand that you need different types of technical experience and expertise in each one of these innovation hubs. That doesn't just come out of thin air. So how do we teach our girls and boys at a very young age that you can become an entrepreneur, you can become an engineer, and how do you start that? And it's not going to happen overnight, but you can certainly build a generation of new technical experts and new entrepreneurs and founders. Because the world is no longer necessarily just a corporate world. We live in a world where innovation is a new type of a career. And I think teaching, again, girls and boys at a young age and instilling that risk-taking understanding of what it takes, but also the possibilities of innovation, is where it starts with being more inclusive, more equitable as a society.
And Ahunna, when you talk about innovation, as well as development finance, you hardly think about the UNDP. But you started an Africa finance hub. Why? What do you hope to achieve with it?
Why, thanks. Well, first of all, we're in the business of people and planet, right? And the big why is what we're focused on. What's the mission, really, for innovation? I think we do want to end poverty. We want to create more opportunities for people to improve their lives, but we want to do so in a sustainable way. And so you need innovation, you need capital. We have operated in a space of thinking that development aid per se is going to do it, but we now see that there are deep challenges that need a lot of investment in terms of financial resources, and that's why UNDP is really getting into this space of finding cheaper money for countries because the fiscal space right now for many countries is very tight, particularly in the developing world. And you just need to have a variety of ways to get resources that are affordable, innovative financing. We're looking at the SDGs, so we need to align financing also to achieving the SDGs. For us, innovation really is critical, is at the heart of trying to get there faster, deeper, and better. So it's critical if we're going to achieve the sustainable development.
How is that vision shaping conversations you're having with donor countries, for instance?
Well, I think many donor countries are also starting to see the relevance of innovation, and they're starting to invest in this space. Let me talk about Africa a little bit. A very young continent in terms of the population, very savvy in terms of their use of technology. The talent, which Fred is growing across the continent and across the world, is in abundance, but opportunity is not there. So a lot of donor organizations that we speak to, I think the conversation is around how do we crowd in financing and opportunity to match with the talent that we're seeing, which is actually quite incredible. And that's why UNDP is really focusing on this initiative we call Timbuktu. Fred talked about culture. We think heritage, young people understanding that they actually have a rich heritage as well, and innovation isn't a thing of the future, it has roots in the past. So Timbuktu, a place in Mali, birthplace of commerce, of knowledge, of a lot of innovation. We go from there to Africa's future. So the concept really is to be rooted in your values and your culture and reimagine the future, carrying that with you. But we take investment seriously in terms of going bold, going big, not the drip, drip, drip that we see often in the way we do development projects. So that's, the mission and the vision is to go big, to go better, and to use technology as much as we can.
And Fred, you talk about culture. It is really about disrupting education to get there, to get the mentality. How are you doing it?
Well, I think it requires changing the mindset of people, right? So starting young, creating an environment where people actually question. And so, especially in the age of AI, I believe that knowing how to ask the right questions is more important than having the right answers, because the answers are at your fingertips. But really, and getting people to think about the questions. How do you look at something that exists and ask why? And think about how can it be done better, right? So it requires a whole new form of education where you actually shift the learning from the teacher as the knowledge holder to the student, where they can teach themselves, they can learn from each other, a lot of peer-to-peer learning, playing and experimentation, putting that into the education, allowing people to, start ventures when they are in high school and in university, and infusing education, entrepreneurship into education, right? So, and then ultimately creating opportunities for people to try things, to imagine, to try things, fail at those things, and not be punished for that, but to actually be encouraged to keep trying and doing more and more things, because through those experiments and those things that don't work is how they'll learn, and seeing everything as a learning opportunity, not as a failure. So one of the things I tell my staff is, there's nothing like failure. There's only learning opportunities. Learning opportunities that go according to plan or that don't go according to plan, but everything is a learning opportunity, right? So at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is change the mindset of people. And without that, you cannot have innovation.
Alina, you're the one with the capital. Radical fund, just how radical is it?
I think it very much builds on what we're talking about here, which is this mindset shift. And
where are you deploying your capital?
So the Radical Fund is a climate-focused fund in Southeast Asia. And we really think that the radical piece is that we need to radically shift the way we think about climate. And by that we mean that it's not just the moral responsibility for all of us to care about climate change and address climate change, but there's also an economic benefit towards investing in innovation and technologies, and again, the entrepreneurs that are delivering that innovation. And there's now ample amount of data that suggests that there's what is called the triple dividends, whereby you actually reduce costs, you yield incredible value, and increase societal benefits by investing in climate sustainability. So we're radically looking at this problem statement and saying, how do we invest into decarbonization and adaptation? Because we know with emerging markets like Southeast Asia region, like Africa, the continent, people are already facing the disasters, and we need to be able to adapt, not just prevent climate change. So we're investing in adaptation and decarbonization. We're investing in early stage. I think that's the other thing that's very important for an innovation ecosystem to flourish. You cannot just invest in growth stage, private equity, infrastructure, large, de-risked projects. You have to build the innovation ecosystem by building that pipeline and by changing and encouraging more entrepreneurs to start their business and not to go into the corporate world, for example. So investing in early stage. And the last but not least, we're investing in Southeast Asia as the Radical Fund. So unlike perhaps others who invest in the US and Europe and the UK, because again, those ecosystems are perceived to be more mature, which in many cases they are, but we believe in building the ecosystem locally and regionally. And so Southeast Asia is our home, and that's when we're developing those innovations and investing in those companies.
We talk about innovation hubs. Africa, 54 countries, Southeast Asia, 10 countries. When you talk about startups, should and are startups from different regions working together to better amplify the impact? Fred?
Yes, we're seeing a lot of that. I mean, for example, Web Summit that was held here in February, March, brought together entrepreneurs from all across, this region. But we brought 100 startups from Africa to come to Qatar, and there was really wonderful exchange of ideas, right? Because what you see is that many parts of the global south, as you call it, face similar challenges with urbanization, with healthcare, infrastructure, and so forth. So ideas that are emerging in different parts, you can cross-pollinate, and there can be a lot of collaborations. We are seeing, for example, I have a company called Sand Technologies, and we build industrial AI solutions for governments and companies around the world. We have talent in Africa, but we're working in Indonesia, helping one of the largest telco in Indonesia, Telkomsel, to figure out where they should roll out their towers and to help them build a smart city there. We're working in India with Reliance Jio, helping them figure out where they should put their towers, using African talent and the innovations that have come out of Africa. Right? The AI algorithms that our talent are building are solving problems in those countries. So there's wonderful opportunity for cross collaboration. I think that and Qatar can play a really important role to convene the talent that is coming from different parts of the world to engage, collaborate, and then ultimately to build great things that can change the world.
And for UNDP, what is the end goal? What are you looking to achieve?
Well, we need to end poverty in the world and inequality. I mean, there's enough wealth to go around.
And the challenges you're facing right now is?
Well, financing is really limited. So I think it's about addressing inequality, making sure that all the sectors that affect human life, we talk about human development, are getting the investments that are needed. So in our Timbuktu initiative, we're looking at 10 different sectors. So it's not just fintech and the things that investors are falling in love with because maybe it's a little bit easier. We're drawing investments into agriculture, for instance, which is really key for livelihoods on the continent of Africa. We're looking at edutech. We have so many kids out of school today. How do we bring innovation and technology to square that off so that we are giving learning opportunities to kids? We're looking at creatives. This is another sort of really exciting sector. on the African continent, whether you're talking about films or you're talking about music or fashion. How do we, again, boost that ecosystem? And I really agree with Alina on the early stage, and that's what Timbuktu is focused on. We need to address that gap in early stage capital. So spreading the sectors, expanding that, but also having this kind of Pan-African DNA to startups. So what we're creating are centers of excellence in each country. Ghana will host agri-tech, for instance. Zambia will host mine tech. South Africa will host creatives. And these will be centers that serve the rest of the continent and the rest of the world. And I think that collaboration that Fred talked about is really key, that we're building platforms where you collaborate across countries, but also across regions. So I think that the model that we have in Timbuktu is really serving a number of purposes. One, we're drawing attention to the young population who have a lot of strength and a lot of talent. Secondly, we're bringing commercial capital and catalytic capital in the same room. This is very rare. And that's where the magic will happen. And then thirdly, we're making sure that the sectors where investment is coming into, it's expanded beyond one or two areas. That's, for us, the end goal then is to make sure that everyone, everywhere, has the opportunity to realize their full potential.
Fred talked about how we can't rely on the Silicon Valley model because you can't cut and paste. But is there a model, an example out there, Alina, that we can tap?
I think it's very specific to each market. And by market, I mean every country. Let's look at
an innovation hub like Singapore, for instance. Is there anything you can learn?
Absolutely. And bear in mind, Singapore is just 5 million people, whereas places like Nigeria or places like Indonesia is 280 million people.
So how do you adapt?
I think we need to learn what are the biggest challenges and opportunities in every market. Now, taking the example of Singapore, for instance, they made very intentional commitments towards developing R&D hubs and making Singapore the home of deep tech and innovation. They've attracted talent, as Fred talked about, as one of the critical elements in driving the ecosystem forward. They have attracted capital. Regulatory-wise, they've made it easier for investors to come in and set up funds in order to invest in the region from Singapore. So they've really made strides to make sure that they've got the talent, the resources, and the regulatory ecosystem. Again, that's not happening overnight. That takes time to develop. So we can certainly learn from that. Other governments, other markets can learn from, what types of dynamic capital is needed. Blended finance mechanisms, bringing catalytic capital and blending philanthropic or concessionary capital with the private sector, mobilizing private sector capital in order to, deliver sort of the returns from both an impact perspective as well as economic and commercial perspective. So we can look at that, but in terms of the actual business models, in terms of the innovations, I think it has to be absolutely very specific because, let's say, vertical farming in Singapore might be an incredible innovation that leads to a scaled solution that addresses the challenges of Singaporeans. Vertical farming in Indonesia is not needed, and there's other agri-tech and aquaculture examples of things that will scale, because at the end of the day, we do want scaled solutions with mass adoption that basically benefits millions of people and not just a few of them.
Right?
Yeah, if I can just build on what Alina is saying, the importance of understanding the challenges and opportunities of a region is very, very critical because that's where innovation comes from. You've got to be frustrated about something that you see in your society. You've got to be inspired by the opportunity to solve it. So, and this goes all the way back into the education system, right? How do you shift people from just learning about what, but really understanding why, and why they should care about a certain issue? So, for example, when we built the African Leadership University, most universities give you a menu of academic disciplines, history, and mathematics, engineering, physics, and so forth. And you choose an academic major. What we did is we said, let's give you a menu of the grand challenges facing Africa and facing the world: healthcare, climate change, education, infrastructure, the empowerment of women, and also a list of opportunities. Where are you uniquely positioned, right? The creative industry, tourism, agriculture. And then they choose not an academic major, but they choose a mission. Pick one of these problems that you're passionate about, understand it deeply, and then curate your learning experience around that. So you create someone who then is driven to be a problem solver, right? They're not just someone who is thinking about academic theory, but they want to solve that problem. And it's something that has deep meaning to them because they live in it. It affects their family, it affects their country. So without that passion, you won't have the energy and the inspiration to actually drive innovation.
We talk about scaling, Ahunna. Given what you're doing right now, how do you scale?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you need to have this big vision that it's important to scale, and that's why I think startups are key. That's where you see the difference between startups and, say, small, medium enterprises. It's not just about creating livelihood opportunities. It's about changing the world, in a way. You have an idea that could change the world. And if you invest in it, you scale. So we've come up with this idea of a $1 billion fund to boost the startup ecosystem on the continent of Africa. And here, as I said, it would be catalytic financing and commercial financing. There you're talking about being serious about going to scale. And when we talk about scale, we talk about the possibility of creating more jobs on the continent. Jobs, really big issue on the continent, but also the opportunity to take ideas that are born in Africa, beyond Africa. We have now the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So you're talking about a 1.3 billion people market. Bringing that on board in this space of innovation is going to create scale. So if you're a creative in Zimbabwe, you can dream beyond Zimbabwe. It's going to be facilitated for you to go to Nigeria and join Nollywood and spread your talent there. So we have actually a lot of opportunities in Africa for scale if we think big enough and stop sort of operating just in the small spaces. The small spaces are still important, but I think it's really key that development financing thinks beyond projects. And today, UNDP is talking about portfolios. And we need a systems shift. So not just, the pockets that we're all in, we really need to think broadly and in a systems way. And I think that's what Timbuktu could do for us, because it's talking about partnerships with governments, partnerships with the academia. By the way, universities have been largely left out of this equation, especially in Africa. And so we're bringing university innovation centers. We've built about 13 of them right now in 13 countries. By the end of the year, we'll have 17. The R&D part needs to be plugged into the industry. So industry, government, business coming together will definitely lead to impact and to scale.
Just one final question, just to wrap up the conversation quickly. Call to action.
Invest in entrepreneurs at the earliest stage. And if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, start your business. There's no better time than starting a new startup today.
Fred?
Start by changing the culture and the mindset. You got to create an ecosystem that allows people to fail, dream, imagine, take risk. Without that, there's no innovation.
Ahunna?
Trust young people.
Ahunna, Fred, Alina, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.